Hello, everyone, and welcome to Persuasive Communications. My name is Mirjana Pantic. You can call me Professor Pantic or Dr. Pantic. Once you graduate, of course, you can call me Mira. Let me share my screen with you as we're going to start with our first lecture in this course. And that lecture is Introduction to Persuasion. Here we go. So let's start by defining persuasion. What is persuasion? According to Perloff, it is the study of attitudes and how to change them. So the most important component of this definition is what? We're focusing on attitudes. So let's first see what attitudes are. Attitudes represent people's beliefs, feelings, and evaluations of other people, issues, things, and so on. I'll give you some examples of attitudes. Let's say we all have certain attitudes toward college education. Those attitudes could be positive or negative. An example of a positive attitude toward college education is, I believe a college degree is the key to success. And an example of a negative attitude is, I think that going to college is a waste of time. Now, imagine that somebody has a negative attitude toward college education and you want to change their attitude. So, how do you do it? You want to make sure that their negative attitude turns into a positive attitude. So, we're going to learn throughout this course how to create persuasive messages, but let's just skim through that at this point. When we want to change someone's attitudes, we need to bring up information that contribute to our belief, our attitude that that a college degree is really the key to success. So how do we do that? We need to emphasize the benefits of getting a college degree. Well, through college, you can get internships and they will help you establish your resume. And when you get on the job market, you are you already have some experience and you look better for the job positions that you're applying to. It really provides you're going to be able to obtain knowledge in a specific area and then use that knowledge to excel at work. Or you can also tell people, well, if you get a college degree, like many companies require their potential employees to have a college degree. So you can't even enter a company where you would like to work without that college degree. So there are just so many elements that you can include in your message to make it more persuasive and convincing for people to change their attitude about college. But then also remember, when we consider convincing people who have the opposite attitude of what we expect them to have, we also need to make sure to acknowledge their opinion. So in this case, you would say something like, well, I do understand that there are so many influencers who earn a lot of money without a college degree. So yeah, you can make money without having a college degree. But remember, like not everyone can be an influencer. So it's a better guarantee for you just to go to college. And if you decide at some point to become an influencer and excel in that area, great. But don't rely on that. Think about how to really acquire knowledge in an area that will later help you excel in be successful. Then there are other attitudes, like attitudes towards the environment. They can be pro-environmental, such as we need to do everything in our power to protect the planet. So that is somebody who has this positive attitude, pro-environmental attitude. And there are people who are skeptical, so their attitude is going to be environmental issues are exaggerated. Aside from these two examples, we can form attitudes about so many different things, including attitudes on drugs, alcohol, music. Some people like R&B, some people like uh, pop music, rock and roll, indie rock, alternative music, and so on. So people have different attitudes towards music or cryptocurrency. Some people believe we should invest in cryptocurrencies. Other people refrain from that. They have a negative attitude towards crypto. Then there are attitudes toward politics and also attitudes toward social media. Should we spend more or less time on social media? Do social media interactions make us happy or sad? And so on. Should social media be limited, banned, and so on? Or should we just keep using them extensively? How do we, so basically, when we think of persuasive communication, we think about all these different areas, people, issues, topics that we form an attitude towards. And that person who wants to persuade you to change your attitude is um, is going to craft messages and make sure that those messages are directed at you with an intention of changing your attitude. I want to give you an example of COVID-19 vaccine and how effective persuasion can be. So you remember when the pandemic started in 2020, we were really not prepared and people were quite skeptical about getting vaccinated because there's not been much research on COVID-19. They believe that like the vaccines maybe were not as effective as we hoped. They were concerned, they were scared, like what would be the side effects and so on. But there was an intense campaign, especially in the US, that was aimed at convincing people to get COVID-19 shot. And what was the result of that campaign? So that campaign, we were able to see it both on mass media, such as TV channels, NBC, ABC, CBS. Also, we were seeing the campaign. And when I'm talking about the campaign, I'm also one of the things that I'm thinking about is all these experts, medical experts who were trying to convince people to get jabbed. And we had a chance to see it in different newspapers such as New York Times, the Washington Post, and so on. So what was the outcome of such campaigns? So what was the outcome of millions of persuasive messages that we were exposed to during 2020 and 2021? Well, according to CDC, at least 270 million people, or 81% of the population, have received at least one dose of the COVID-19 vaccine, which means the campaign persuasive messages that we were exposed to were quite effective. And aside from that, CDC data showed that 230,637,348 people, or 70% of the population, are considered fully vaccinated, or which means that, as you see this on this graph, they received three or more COVID shots. Now, at this point, what I want you to do, because I'm recording these video lectures and we will talk about persuasive communication more when we meet in class, but what I want you to do before we meet is I want you to think about a time when a media message or an effective piece of communication changed your mind about something. Describe the event and your reaction to it. Explain specifically what caused your opinion to change. Just write an essay of about 250 words and post it in classes under effective persuasion. Well, I want you to do this exercise because I really want you to think about how effective a persuasive message can be. Like how, um, think about it can be an ad or it can be a news story, whatever you were exposed to that really make you change your mind about something. And please, because I already discussed the example of COVID-19 vaccine, so please don't use that as an example, but think of something else. And then when we meet in class, we will talk about that specific example that you shared in more detail. So you will basically have a mini presentation of of your experience with the persuasive message in class. Okay. Now, let's take a look at the roots of persuasion. How, where can we find the roots? Well, basically, you can find them in ancient Greece when traveling educators, known as sophists, visited cities where they charged for lectures on a range of subjects, most notably public speaking and political eloquence. And in our next lecture, we will talk about what kind of reactions this caused, and we will dig into more ethical issues related to their lectures. But for now, let's just say that we can trace these roots all the way to ancient Greece, where sophists visited cities and they were basically delivering public speaking lectures for money. Now, in our modern era, it is very common for politicians, for example, to have advisors who would tell them exactly how to craft messages in order to gain more supporters. This might be new, but in a way it is not, because even like a few centuries ago, at the beginning of the 16th century, specifically Niccolo Machiavelli, you probably heard of him. He was an Italian Renaissance historian, diplomat, and philosopher. He wrote his famous piece, The Prince, which I recommend you to read, which was a handbook for politicians on how to stay in power. So it was primarily based on deception, but it basically provided guidelines for them on how to stay in power, what they need to do, how do they communicate with people in order to gain um, their affection, their support. And then in the United States, we can see some roots of persuasion in the 19th century, when social reformers were concerned about the rise in binge drinking, which is why they started convincing people to refrain from drinking alcohol. And after that, a much broader movement emerged, calling on Americans to embrace a vegetarian diet, to exercise more, and to stop smoking and drinking. What do we see in the 20th century? So the 20th century is basically an era of modern persuasion, and we can see that primarily in advertising. So every advertising message is aimed at convincing you to buy a product or to embrace an idea or a politician, to vote for them, and so on. But we can also see people communicating through T-shirts, like they have slogans or they have messages on their T-shirts which they use to show like their opinion related to something. But we can also communicate persuasion through jewelry and even tattoos, as you can see. So these are all like subtle forms of persuasion. So persuasive messages needs to be conveyed in a way that we want to um, have people either change their attitude, or we want their support for our ideas and goals. Let's take a look at the persuasive communication in the digital era. How is it different from persuasive communication in the 20th century? The digital era, what I refer to the era that basically started at the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century. Persuaders are now being challenged, and the reason for that is a two-way communication that is taking place. So like when it comes to persuasion of before this two-way communication got established with the internet, so there was basically a one-way communication. I tell you, as a persuader, I can represent like an ad company, for example. I share a message with you, and you just simply react to that message by buying my product or supporting my idea. But then with the two-way communication, I can transfer the meaning of the message, or I can give you feedback to your persuasive message and challenge it. So there is a two-way communication between a persuader and a persuadee, because we can completely change the meaning of messages in the online world. And when it comes to persuasion of the digital era, social media basically further blurs the boundaries between persuader and persuadees, because the one who communicates a message that they crafted to um, target certain population, change their opinion, make them embrace a certain idea, now can be changed because those who react to that message can also share their opinion and challenge ideas, and they can even be more vocal and more strong in that than the persuader himself or herself. So let's take a look at some examples of persuasive messages. I picked 67 Days of School for a reason, because that's like one of the most popular slogans these days, and it actually was declared the word of 2025. And then there is another one, Black Lives Matter. So what do these represent? So these messages, they are basically slogans, and slogans are important elements of persuasive messages. Why? Because they are brief, they are straight to the point, and they communicate ideas clearly. So let's take a look at some effective persuasive slogans. So one of them is Black Lives Matter. It is basically this slogan represent, and when we see it either on face masks or t-shirts, or when we see graffitis in the city, all of these like basically are so effective, and they have people repeated them so many times that when you repeat something so many times, that people get a better idea of what that is, what that means. So Black Lives Matter, for instance, it is a call to end racism and violence against Black people, emphasizing the need for equality, justice, and recognition of the value of Black lives within society. Then some other slogans include Defund the Police, which is a demand to relocate portions of police funding toward community services such as education, healthcare, and mental health programs, with the goal of addressing the root causes of crime and reducing police violence. Then another slogan, Make America Great Again. Everyone knows the meaning of the slogan. It's basically the slogan has been popularized by Donald Trump, expressing a desire to restore perceived past prosperity, strength, and traditional values in the United States. And there was the Me Too movement, Me Too slogan, which actually represents a movement that raises awareness about sexual harassment and assault, empowering survivors, especially women, to share their experiences and demand accountability and cultural change. Now, if we look at today's persuasion and how it is different from previous eras, there are like a couple of things that should be emphasized. First of all, the number of messages. Like we can see these messages multiplied, and they're being shared everywhere. And then we have so many channels of communication. When it comes to persuasive messages, it's not just that we now look into those messages as messages delivered to us through newspapers or television, but also we can see these messages outside in the form of graffitis or people wearing t-shirts, so which is something that was common in the 20th century. But aside from that, we can see a lot of messages on social media that basically reaches out so many people. And then there's speed and brevity. So these messages are brief, concise, and they can be disseminated at a high speed and reach millions and millions of people. Another important thing is that persuasion, maybe in the past it was conducted by institutions, but now we can see more and more of persuasion being conducted by not just organizations. And when I say organizations, I mean it can be related to non-governmental organization, think tanks, and so on. But also we can see these persuasive efforts being conducted by individuals, entrepreneurs. People use their social media channels influencers use social media channels to disseminate their persuasive messages. They're more subtle. There is a complexity that we see in these messages, and there is also complexity in terms of just the content of the message and the way that message is being communicated. Because as I mentioned, like when we have this two-way communication, it goes back and forth. So you disseminate a message, you receive feedback, then you react to it, and so on. So this is all turned into like a digital game, where we as persuaders, for instance, need to take into account what people say, how they react, and when we decide to like further communicate that message in order to change people attitudes or make them embrace our ideas. Digitization is also an important component. As I mentioned, you can see now that many institutions and organizations, especially political parties and celebrities, they do not necessarily rely, I mean, they definitely do not rely just on mass media channels to disseminate their messages, but they are aware how important it is to be present on social media, to use diverse digital tools to share information with others. And it's another thing that today's persuasion environment is defined by is this exposure to a wealth of new but also bias confirming information. And the thing that I have in mind is algorithms. Like we are basically being like expose this content that is in line with our already established beliefs. And when you see ads, you're likely to run into something that you search for, or run into something that aligns with your already established like news or social media consumption patterns. So the problem is that there is so much information, but then the information we get through these channels is predominantly the information that is tailored to what we would be likely to search for, or what aligns with our already established beliefs and attitudes. And, persuasive messages, if we look at social media, they can be so brief and so convincing. Like, very, very, when we talk about like brevity, even like telling people like my post, it's a form of persuasion. Like my post, repost my ex post, follow me on Instagram. So these are all messages that we disseminate. They are short, they're concise. So we try to disseminate them to make sure that people are um, embracing, like doing what we want them to do. Because persuasion is that. So we focus on persuasion as we use these persuasive tools to change people's attitude. Persuasion is basically, I want to make you do this because it is important to me. So you want to make people do something that you want them to do. So, and it's not manipulation. We'll touch upon that in the next lecture, in our next lecture. But it's basically persuasion when you want to make people do something that you want them to do. So follow me on Instagram is another message. Visit my blog, donate to my cause. So these are all donate to my causes. These are all messages that short, effective messages that we use to convince people to do something for us. What are effects of social media persuasive messages? So these messages can involve simple catchphrases, as I mentioned, repost my ex post, follow me on Instagram, and so on. They can diffuse more quickly and widely than previous technologies. So we can literally just click on post this or share this, and the messages goes and gets to so many people. Also, social media persuasive message enables others to participate in conveying the message, the meaning of the message. It is capable of mobilizing individuals across national borders. So Black Lives Matter movement and Me Too movement are great examples because they were able to become that they use social media as their main tool to disseminate this message, to um, emphasize the importance of discussing these issues in a modern society. Now, what are some challenges that we encounter when it comes to social media and persuasion? The problem is, and I mentioned algorithms and people's tendency to read messages that just reaffirms their beliefs. So the reaffirm their beliefs. So the problem is that we look to, if we form an attitude about something, let's say, let's go back to the college example. So, I think I should get a college degree. I think that a college degree would make me successful, more successful. Like I'm more likely to succeed if I get a college degree than if I don't. So I will go online and look for information that confirms that attitude, because I don't want to feel uncomfortable not um, encountering any messages that are actually telling me something different from what I would like to hear. So that's the problem with social media, is just you're getting exposed to all these messages that simply just reaffirm your beliefs. And another problem is that the spreading of false information can be massive. Like we can spread our wise, informative, persuasive messages easily, but also there are other people who enjoy deceiving others, and spreading false information is equally easy as spreading real, accurate information. Another problem is that one-sided story can lead to misperception. So focusing on one element of the story and like disregarding the other one can simply create this misperception, and that also often happens on social media. I also like detected something that I don't like. I noticed how, when I go and like search for content on social media, and a lot of things that come up to me are related to women empowerment, and I like that topic and I engage with that content. So I receive all this content, but I'm thinking, yeah, but somebody else who is actually not very more on the conservative side, or let's say more, I wouldn't say conservative, but like is not as happy seeing women empowered in the 21st century. Like they might be receiving, and I'm sure this is the case, like they might be receiving like completely different content, and like be exposed to only the other side of this issue and like a different opinion, and they can feed themselves with that content and think that this is the right way to approach things in life, or this is the right thing to do. So their um, system of values is completely different than mine, but also the algorithm recognizes this, so it feeds them with content that they are going to embrace, rather than the content that would challenge their viewpoints in any way. So I mentioned false information briefly, and I just want you to be aware, like, of a couple of examples of false information that we are most likely to encounter online. So they include misinformation. So what is misinformation? It is false information that is shared unintentionally. The person spreading it is not aware that content is inaccurate. So let's say you find some health related information, such as, oh, don't eat any protein powder because it'll like reflect this way or that way on your health, and then you see that information and you share it further, but you have no idea that it's actually false. Protein is good for you, and then you kind of share that information unknowingly, unintentionally, and that is called misinformation. But if somebody, let's say, if somebody says, oh, don't drink lemon water because it is unhealthy, and then they just want to, I don't know, for whatever reason, see how people will react to that, laugh at them, or they don't want lemon to be sold, whatever. Like I just made up this example, but basically with this information, the person who created such information, they know exactly that the information is false, and they shared it deliberately. So the person spreading this information knows it is untrue, and they simply aim to deceive others. And then there's malinformation. So that information is based on reality, but it is shared with malicious intent, often to harm or damage someone's reputation or privacy. So examples of such information could be naked pictures of a celebrity that they never allowed to be shared further, but somebody got in possession of them and then they share this information publicly. So that is malinformation. So the information is actually based on reality, but the way it is shared without that person knowing that such information about them is shared is basically means that it is shared with malicious intent, and the aim of that information is to harm someone's reputation. And as we are like ending this lecture, I just want to point at different concepts that we have covered today, and we'll talk more about all of these in class. What is basically persuasion? Persuasion is the process that allows an individual to change someone's attitude. So um, it dates back to ancient Greece when sophists traveled across Greece and then they delivered public speaking lectures for money. Examples of persuasion include advertising and slogans. In the digital era, we started experiencing this two-way communication that enabled receivers to reinterpret the meaning of messages. So it's not like before we had this two-way communication, it wasn't just the message creator who would design this message and direct it to an audience, and then they just need, react to it in a way that they don't embrace an idea, vote for a candidate, or buy a product. But now there is feedback to that message, and there is like an exchange between the persuader and persuadee. Major challenges to persuasion, as we just discussed, include the spread of false and misleading content. So it's something that can be spread easily in the 21st century, just like any message. So these are my references. Please read the textbook. And if you have any questions, you can just email me, or I'll see you in class soon. So thank you very much for listening. And again, if you have any question, just send me an email. Have a great week. Bye-bye.